So, I mean, let's specifically talk about that. So there's really two sort of almost like silos of things that led to this in terms of, I mean, there's a lot of different factors, obviously, but what could have been done differently? We don't know why that axle was on fire, but we do know that there are plenty of times where these trains have to stop. And if they're fighting regulations about the speed in which these things travel, that stopping becomes more perilous. Let's talk about the brakes, because this seems to be like sort of the most obvious example of this, and how this company in particular went from sort of touting these brakes as a potential revolutionary or safety feature to forget about that.
So I do a lot of stories on corporate malfeasance and corporate capture of regulators, and this story still blew my mind. Basically, right now, freight trains in the U.S. have braking systems that were designed in 1868, and essentially they stop trains car by car, one at a time. And trains are getting very long. The one that derailed in East Palestine had 150 cars. I think it was nearly 10,000 feet long. So
and we should just let me just, why are they that long now? Because this is also part of the story. Like each one of these elements are part of the story of them trying to just maximize their profits at the sake of safety.
Yeah, so my understanding is it's sort of like an efficiency thing, and you can have fewer workers if you make the trains longer and longer. So this is part of the slashing of the workforce. So rewind to 2007, and Norfolk Southern, whose train just derailed in East Palestine, starts touting this new braking system, which is far better. They say it can reduce stopping distances on trains by up to 60%. And rather than stopping trains car by car, as the old system does, it can stop all the cars at once, which is a pretty good idea. So they're touting the benefits of this new braking system, an ECP braking system. It's electronically controlled pneumatic brakes, and saying how great it is, and how it will be good for the train companies because they won't need to inspect the brakes as often. After stopping a train, you can get it going again more quickly, etc. In the 2010s, as more and more crude oil is being shipped on trains, as well as other hazardous materials, the Obama administration says, well, great, you've discovered and designed this new braking system that will make trains quite a bit safer, prevent derailments. We're going to move to require them on trains carrying highly hazardous flammable materials. So they moved to issue a regulation. The industry turns against it. They fight tooth and nail, including Norfolk Southern. They reported lobbying against it. The Obama administration issues a rule. It only applies to sort of a narrow class of trains, but they do the ECP braking rule. And then the rail industry continues to fight it. They get it repealed under Trump.
Why were they touting it at one point and then saying, actually, no, we don't really want it? What was the theory behind that? Is it just to drive their stock prices up?
Yeah, I've heard two explanations for it. So one is that, even though the companies knew it would lead to cost savings in the long term, there's sort of this idea that Wall Street is not okay with any type of substantial capital expenditure. So this is part of the buyback era story. They don't care about long-term cost savings. They don't want money spent in the short term. Something that a couple of former Federal Railroad Administration regulators told me that you hear in all sorts of fights over regulations is that even though the train companies know the brakes are better, they don't want to give regulators a foot in the door. They see any regulation as like encroachment on their industry. They'll just fight any regulation, even if it's good for their bottom line. So those were the two explanations that I really found to be the most compelling in my reporting.
Because they don't. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, that makes you can expand on it. I just wanted to move to the fact that the Biden administration hasn't reinstated it. I mean, the fact that it doesn't even really harm the industry profit-wise to that much. It's just the principle of the thing. I think underscores how inexcusable it is that Buttigieg and the Biden administration haven't been proactive on this and don't seem to have any plans to reinstate these regulations.
Well, let's go
Yeah,
into that, because I mean it's the industry, it seems to me, and this is something that I think we can see across the board with all industries. They don't want the precedent set. Even if it saves them money, they don't want the precedent set that there is authority for the federal government to impose safety restrictions on them, or worker rule or anything. The precedent is bad, and they will. And I would also argue that as far as the timing, and I haven't quite dug into this quite enough, but the timing seems to be that they are on a move to cut their workforce. And so they need to justify their ability to cut their workforce. And there's sort of almost like a bait and switch here. We've developed these new braking system that's going to allow us to cut our workforce, expand the length of the trains. And this gets into the whole union thing where they wouldn't let them have sick days because they have a very lean workforce. And these breaks are going to allow us to cut our workforce. And then they realize, like, at one point, like, we can just cut our workforce and we don't actually have to institute those technological advances that would have maintained some measure of safety. But talk about, like, how much of an expectation was there that after the Trump administration rolled back these sort of very narrow requirements for these breaks in specific, really hazardous situations? What was the expectation in terms of what the Biden administration would do?
Yeah, so at the time of the Trump repeal, there was pretty widespread outcry from environmental groups, Democrats. I think Senator Merkley said, redo the cost benefit analysis and reinstate the rule. There was a finding that the Trump cost benefit analysis had been faulty. They didn't really factor in the cost of derailments, which somewhat makes sense because often rail companies don't pay that cost anyways. But so there were sort of widespread calls at the time for the rule to be reinstated. When Biden came into office, some of the unions were pressing Biden and as you say, Buttigieg, who's at the helm of the transportation department, to redo the ECP brake rules. And there was actually a congressional hearing last summer on rail safety where a former FRA regulator said, like, redo the brake rule. There are going to be more derailments. This is a high stakes situation. So there have been calls for the rule to be redone. Now, just in the past few days, some lawmakers like Representative Ilhan Omar have called for the rules to be reinstated. We're learning a lot about the Buttigieg transportation department, I guess, in recent months. So expectations are extremely low, but there are calls for him to redo this rule.
Do we know where these ideas? I mean, like, it seems like these railroads did a broad sort of like efficiency measures they started to institute 15 years ago or so. What consulting company was brought in to help them with these logistics, do you know, by any chance?
Was it McKinsey?
Well, I don't know.
That's why it sounds like them, right?
I'm asking. I mean, it's not hard to imagine. And if it wasn't McKinsey, it was somebody who had a consulting firm that was just like McKinsey.
Right. I mean, the point you're making is correct, which is that this is the consulting firm playbook, is like destroy your company and juice the profits. So Pete Buttigieg certainly has experience in that type of business model from his time at McKinsey.
But I think that's the answer, right? I mean, we're kind of saying, why are they not re-implementing this rule? It's because he's ideologically, I think, much more sympathetic to what the railroads are trying to do with an efficiency model than the safety regulations that would be imposed. I mean, that it's ideological with him, I would say.